Hello, Dan.
Robin, good afternoon. I almost said good morning.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Saratoga Podcast, everybody. We missed you last week.
Yes, it's it's going a few weeks now without a city hall meeting
I
because
know.
it's a 5 Tuesday month, so that
I
sort of
know.
stretches it out. Yeah.
I know. So the city council meeting, just for those who don't know, it's the first and third Tuesdays of the month. So it'll be next Tuesday. I hope everyone had a good Memorial Day weekend. Dan, did you have a restful weekend?
Restful, no, but a good one. I mean, that weather was every single day was just terrific. We got out every day. We had somewhere we had to be, something we had to do. One of them involving a kids' party at the movie theater, which was a new twist for me. I don't know if you've done that before, but a kid's birthday party. You go and you have your pizza, and then you go in to see the movie. So it's
Totally.
kind of neat thing. So I have my most recent movie that I've seen on this planet is now The Little Mermaid.
Oh, well, I mean, I know those songs by heart, but from, the 90s. I'm a 90s product of a Disney, Little Mermaid.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well,
But we
this is
digress.
the newest version of it.
I know. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Although I have no one in the household who wants to go see it with me, so you may have to come back and see it with me again. But we digress.
Well, my daughters may want to go. I'll let you borrow them for an hour or two.
That sounds perfect. So we have lots to talk about today, and unfortunately, Adam's not with us. Adam, we miss you, buddy. But we have lots to talk about today, and we have a very special guest that we're excited about, which is Commissioner Jim Montagnino. He'll be joining us very shortly. Commissioner Montagnino, we've been hoping to have on for a while, and so we're really excited to have him on today. And there was big news that came out of City Hall yesterday, which was the appointment of a new police chief. And so we're really looking forward to talking to Commissioner Montagnino about that news. And we will get into that. I actually see him here. So if we want to jump into that right away, Dan, does that work for you? And then we can hop into some of
But before we bring the commissioner on, I don't know, Lieutenant McIntosh. You do. Could you
Yes.
give a little bit of your personal viewpoint of the pick and him as a person and him as a leader?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So it's actually it really comes full circle for me because Officer McIntosh at the time, way back in 2019, when I first contacted the police department, I was setting up a ride-along. I was campaigning to become public safety commissioner, and he was my point of contact to set up my ride-along. And I had no idea who I was emailing or who I was going to be going in to meet. And I was pardon my French, but scared shitless because, it was my first kind of interaction with the police department. And I was just really nervous and didn't know who I was going to be dealing with. And just couldn't have been lovelier. He couldn't have been more professional. And it was the first time, I didn't go out with him on my ride along, but he was the person who facilitated the whole thing. And he just couldn't have been more professional. He couldn't have been more welcoming. And it was kind of my first entree into the police department. And then he was deployed. He went out on deployment. So he was gone for some time. And I was just incredibly impressed with his military background and his service to our country. And, those kind of skills that you bring back in terms of leadership and bring those back to the department, I just think there's such added value there. And I could really see those leadership abilities and how he brought them back and utilized them in his career in the police department and, rose through the ranks of the police department in utilizing those skill sets. And I just think he's an incredible talent, and I think he'll be a great leader. And I think he was an excellent choice as chief. But I think there's a lot that needs to be explained to the public about how the process works in terms of civil service. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk to Commissioner Montagnino about, because I think there's been a lot of unfair criticism leveled by specifically Saratoga BLM. And I think that context here is really important, especially when it comes to describing how people are promoted and why. So those are some of the things I definitely wanted to talk to Commissioner Montagnino about.
And I'm sure 99% of our viewers know what we're talking about, but just to be clear, it was yesterday they announced Lieutenant McIntosh will succeed retiring Chief Shane Crooks. Is retiring a June 30th date. Often that means they leave earlier because they have some leave time that they need to use and so forth. So this was kind of momentous news in the city. That's a big deal. And his qualifications, I'm going to steal a little bit of Commissioner Montagnino's thunder here, but his qualifications are just stellar. Now, I admit, as an old cop, he's an experienced veteran, but he's still a young, relatively speaking, for the Chiefs position. And that's not to cast any negativity on it, but it's noteworthy. And maybe I'll bring that up as an open topic with the commissioner when he comes on. But it's just noteworthy. He's probably the youngest chief, I got to think, in Saratoga Springs history, or he will be when he's officially appointed.
I got to say, Dan, I was 39 when I started as Commissioner of Public Safety. And when I was with the officers on patrol, I literally felt like I was the mother. Like I've never felt older being out on patrol with the police officers. I was like, holy cow. I literally brought out all my maternal instincts. So, we have a younger group. And so I think it's, I think it's actually great that we have someone who's a little bit on the younger side. And I think because of his tremendous experience, both in Saratoga, but also out on deployment, I think he's got a real maturity level and a gravitas that kind of offsets what people might associate with, just his numerical age. And I think it's also great that we have someone who could really grow with the department and hopefully be the chief for, the long haul.
A very good point. And before we bring the commissioner on, I also want to mention, it's all about the new guy, but Shane Crooks has guided this department. He's led this department through what had to be the most tumultuous time. I can't speak for 1925, but from what I know about this history, the last few years, and you were there for part of it, Commissioner Montagnino there for part of it, the most tumultuous time for the city and certainly the police department, policing in general. He goes off to a well-deserved retirement. Maybe we can reach out to him in the coming weeks before he is officially retired, and maybe interview him before he goes for good, because I have a lot of respect for him.
I will get emotional if I talk about it. So it's hard because he has such a special place in my heart, and we did go through so much together, and I just have so much respect and adoration for Chief Crooks. And actually texted him the other day. I'm like, Chief, you make me cry like you're an ex-boyfriend. I'm like, because the thought of you leaving is just, again, it breaks my heart to see him leave. But, he's retiring, and, he only has good things ahead, and he has done such tremendous things for our community. And, I thank him so much for the years and years and years of service he gave Saratoga Springs. So, nothing but love for Chief Crooks, certainly.
Great.
So should we bring in the commissioner?
Well, sure. Go ahead.
All right. Commissioner Montagnino, hello.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me here.
No, we appreciate it. I know it's been a long time coming, and I was thrilled to hear that you were coming on today, and also especially thrilled to have you on with this, really exciting announcement.
Yeah, it's really wonderful news. I mean, our new chief has such an incredible resume, and I was listening to you earlier, and as Dan said, he stole a little bit of the thunder with talking about his credentials. I can't imagine looking at Lieutenant McIntosh's resume that a person that young can have accomplished so many things in one very short span on the planet. Remarkably accomplished person, and as you mentioned, Robin, as an individual, he's just aces. Just a genuine, warm human being. When you talk to anybody else in the department, they look up to him. I heard an anecdote recently that when he was in the academy, there were people joking with him about how long is it going to be before you're chief. That people recognized his leadership skills immediately.
And Commissioner, if I could jump in and sort of put you on the spot from memory, but I think you'll know some of this. For those that didn't get to read the articles in either the Gazette or the TU, and I believe the Saratogan eventually got an article up, could you list some of his qualifications for us? They're really impressive.
Well, I mean, certainly in terms of his educational background, he has a bachelor's degree summa cum laude. He's got a master's degree in public administration that he earned while a police officer. He's currently at the FBI National Academy and will be graduating in about a week. So, in terms of the smarts, he's an extremely intelligent individual and has worked very hard to further his education, even while working a full-time job and a military career as a member of the National Guard. His military, he's got, at my count, 23 separate medals and commendations.
Wow.
He was deployed to active duty in Iraq. He's been in Kuwait. He's been in Puerto Rico for Operation Maria in the aftermath of the hurricane. So he's been deployed worldwide, and he's seen really tough situations. In fact, if I could share another anecdote that I learned from Chief Crooks back when I was interviewing then Sergeant McIntosh for lieutenant. Chief Crooks told me about an exercise that all of the officers do. It's an active shooter drill, and they use an abandoned building. And part of the drill involves someone firing blank rounds in a stairwell. And the chief says that ordinarily, even the most seasoned police officers jump like basketball players when they hear that shot go off with the echo reverberating in the stairwell. Chief Crooks happened to be there when then Sergeant McIntosh was undergoing this training. And Chief Crooks said, when the shots were fired, you would have thought that Tyler was sitting on the beach sipping iced tea.
Wow.
That he betrayed no change in his demeanor, which indicated that he had been through far worse real experiences than that, and also indicated that he had the kind of qualities of that kind of temperament that keeps his cool even when things are exploding around him. So that made a big impression on me. And even going back to the little things. Last year, we had the first award ceremony since the pandemic began. And then he had just become lieutenant. Then newly minted Lieutenant McIntosh volunteered to take charge of the organization of the event. And there were dozens of different commendations being given to a bunch of people, some active, some retired. And he had the entire thing so flawlessly organized. It was just remarkable to see. Every step of the way, the location of every individual, the location of every one of the awards, everything worked flawlessly. And it impressed me because here's a person who has such an attention for detail, even in the small things, that there's nothing that he's above. And right immediately upon Lieutenant Gilson's retirement, Lieutenant McIntosh volunteered to take the reins of the accreditation process, which is the kind of thing that involves some real micromanagement of details, the kind of stuff that we would find boring, evidence storage and retrieval and document retrieval, that kind of stuff. And he, is the person who doesn't wait for somebody else to take over. He takes over himself.
That's phone book thick, right, Commissioner? The things for accreditation. It's not just a 2-page sheet of checkoffs. It is a phone book of documents and orders and so forth. Correct?
Yeah, you're right, Dan. In fact, to give you some context there, Schenectady is an accredited police agency. They have 3 officers working full time just to maintain accreditation. It's wow. That labor intensive because there are so many different pieces of information that have to be organized and reported on and accounted for. So it's a major undertaking.
Maybe silly. This is maybe both of you can answer this. So he's at the FBI school now for what is it a course? Is it what is he there?
It's a multiplicity of courses. It's basically it's leadership training. It's going deep diving into many aspects of law enforcement at the top levels.
That's awesome.
Being taught by the best trainers. I believe it's a 4-month curriculum, and he's just about done with that.
And it's pretty intense, from what I understand. It's not just simple sit in a classroom. As I understand, there's physical training and things like that. It's got the academy feel to it.
That's fantastic. Well, I feel like, all of the experience that you just described really, as some people, because I think I wouldn't even call this criticism, but the only observations that I've, heard people make would be about his age and, being a bit young. But I think the experiences you're describing, you gain so much maturity and so much perspective when you've seen the world that way. You've experienced what he's experienced in combat. When you've taken, the level of education to where he's taken it. It's just all creates such an incredibly impressive package. Yeah, I think.
And as I mentioned, one of the important things too is the esteem that he has from the men and women that he works with. I remember when we did the interviews for his promotion to lieutenant, there was a person with more time on the force, one of the sergeants who was in line for the promotion. And I called that person to say that Tyler had gotten the position. And that person's response was remarkable, because they said, well, it doesn't surprise me at all. He's just head and shoulders above everybody. This was a person who had been passed over for promotion, but was genuine enough and honest enough to say, this is a person who really stands out.
Now, Commissioner, can you speak, because this has been like so frustrating for me. Saratoga BLM specifically has been super critical of who you had been interviewing for police chief. And the way they've characterized it has been, you've just looked around the police department and decided you're going to pick these two or these three people as candidates for police chief just based on your own personal preference. And there seems to be this whole missing context of civil service and the civil service system and how it works. And basically, people don't seem to understand that we have a civil service system that's put in place that basically you have to qualify to take a test. And it's basically put in place to eliminate nepotism and favoritism, and to eliminate a system in which a commissioner could just pick personal favorites or, nepotism to promote people. It's a way to make things fair and equitable. And you have to score and be on the top, top three highest scorers. And you're given a list from civil service as to who you can choose to interview for these promotions. And so you're restricted to a list of people. So could you just explain this a little bit more so that people understand how these choices are made and who you're able to interview for these promotions?
Right. Well, you've said it perfectly, because obviously you were Commissioner of Public Safety and you made numerous appointments and promotions in the fire service as well as in the police department. So you know the system as well as I do, I'm sure. As you say, there's an exam. And it's a promotional exam, the way the system is currently set up, which means that you have to be in the Saratoga Springs Police Department in order to sit for the exam. And you need a certain number of years of experience as a sergeant or a lieutenant before you can sit for the chief's test. And only the top three scorers, there have to be three people at least who passed the test for there to be a valid list. So in this case, there were three people. It was Lieutenant McIntosh, it was Sergeant Veach, Paul Veach, and it was Lieutenant Bob Gilson, who were the three when the list first came out. So there was a legitimate eligible list from which the appointment must be made. Now, in full disclosure, there was a change in that Lieutenant Gilson retired. So that left two names on the list of three. So an appointment of either of those two individuals would be a permanent appointment from a valid list.
Right.
But there would have been an option, which is rarely used when there are people on the list. But under the law, I could have made a provisional appointment. Now, there's an asterisk there because another chief's test was administered back in February and the results aren't out yet. But the same people took that most recent test. So Lieutenant McIntosh took the February test and
Right.
Sergeant Veach took the February test.
Right.
And I believe also Lieutenant Warfield and Lieutenant Mitchell.
Okay.
So again, all people in the Saratoga Springs Police Department, because we are still promotional, we're not open competitive. And so at some point down the road, there will be scoring of that exam and there'll be a release of a list, but it's only going to be one of those four names anyway.
Right.
Now, there would have been a theoretical possibility of out of thin air making an appointment, a provisional appointment of somebody who's not on that list, but that, first of all, wouldn't have been valid because then when the test results come out, it's not going to include this hypothetical other person.
Right.
And again, getting back to the point that we are limited by the current rules to promotional appointments. So it has to be somebody in the department. And pretty much the upper echelon of the command staff are all part of that pool. So, I remember you're referring to the February 7th City Council meeting, which was the first of the two meetings that have been shut down by BLM. They took the position that I had picked these names basically out of thin air.
Yes.
And that the word they used was elected, that the new chief would be elected from among the three names that I picked.
Correct.
And you're absolutely right, Robert, that I had nothing to do with the picking of the names. That's the civil service test that's governed by applicable law. So,
and I'm sorry, one real quick follow-up, Dan. So hypothetically, because I don't actually know what would happen, but if hypothetically you had decided to name someone not in the department, if you just decided to go rogue and name some other police officer who was from some other department, would there not be like legal action taken? I mean, like what would have been the consequences of that?
Oh, well, I think the consequence would have been pretty immediate, that any of the people in the running for the position as a promotional appointment would have standing to bring a lawsuit and say, you can't just go off the list and pull somebody out of nowhere.
Right.
Now, I had discussed going back as far back as February of 22 with the Civil Service Commission, the possibility of having open competitive exam for police chief and fire chief. And I brought it up in February of 22, and I brought it up again in June of 22. And at the request of the Civil Service Commission, I actually prepared a draft job spec for that. But up to now, civil service hasn't chosen to adopt an open competitive system for the selection of chief. And therefore, at this point, it's not on the table.
I personally would love, this is not exactly what you're getting at, but I personally would love to, years ago, there was a 3-person committee that was appointed to work with civil service on basically getting the test information and the civil service announcements for hiring firefighters and police officers on an entry level, getting that information out to different areas, to schools, to different communities, to kind of broaden the audience that information was going to. Much like when we're campaigning, how we say, we have to go to where people are, get to where people are at. And I think I would love to see that kind of an effort, that maybe that kind of a committee be reestablished so we could broaden the pool of prospective candidates, because that information is really dense, when civil service announcements are put out. And so the way people consume information is so different nowadays. I think it would be an interesting effort to put together that kind of committee and work on how we're disseminating that information and where we're disseminating it to. But conversation for another time.
Well, no, I think it's always timely, Robin, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's a wonderful idea. If you think back, we had a situation about a year ago where we were in desperate need of 9/11 dispatchers.
Yeah.
And we had an exam that was upcoming, and we didn't have more than a handful of people signing up for the exam.
Right.
And Mark Mulholland of Channel 13 actually did a little piece where he said, hey, Saratoga Springs is looking for dispatchers. It's fascinating work. It's interesting work. It's public service. It's first responder. The governor issued an executive order recognizing 9/11 dispatchers as first responders. And Mark's little piece on the news program actually brought 47 applicants forward.
Wow.
So we ended up, as you point out, if the word gets out broadly enough, then we can get more people applying for the entry level kinds of positions.
Yeah.
Which you have one right now, right? The police department officer exam is you're currently accepting applications to take the test, correct?
Yeah, we're beating the bushes for that. In fact, we are short for the July Academy. We had reserved 10 slots for the Academy from the current crop of applicants, and we had 7 conditional offers, and that's been winnowed down somewhat by the psych evals and the medical evals and so on. So we're actually short the number of officers we need to get to full staffing that we're actually financed for. So,
which is never good, because it's one of those things, which I know, Commissioner, it's like, if you don't keep filling the pipeline, you end up in a bad spot.
Yeah. And what we don't want to do is lower our standards.
No, definitely not.
We did pass on some candidates who passed the exam, but just didn't meet the qualities that we look for in the screening process. You know from your experience how detailed the screening process is for police and firefighters both.
And I think it's one of our biggest points of pride as a department that we have higher standards than so many departments in our area. I think that's really one of our biggest points of pride. With the budget season coming up, is it a consideration to, especially with the surplus that the city we have, according to Commissioner Songby, have you considered potentially reinstating the assistant chief position to support our new chief moving forward?
That's a really, really good question. And we have been in meetings with the command staff, and we are planning to do some reorganization in that regard. I don't want to commit to anything in particular, but there is a need for someone at the top. Basically, from having been here, right? The collective bargaining agreements for the upper echelon in the police department create a situation where most of the people in charge are working day shifts Monday to Friday. Mm-hmm. And that leaves the people able to make decisions on the fly short on the weekends and at nighttime. So we're looking into a way of having someone. We now have lieutenants working in the evening and night shifts, but we'd like to have something where somebody, whether it's going to be an assistant chief or a captain, both of which positions have existed in the past. Yeah. Someone. I'm leaning more toward the patrol angle of things rather than the administrative stuff. Right. Certainly you need the chief for policy determinations and for communication with the public and those kinds of things. But we really need someone at the upper level who's available 24/7 and better still actually on duty most of the time on those peak periods, those Friday and Saturday nights on Caroline Street in the middle of the summer. Sure. Where you want somebody able to make command decisions quickly and be there on the spot.
Sure.
Right. Hey, I want to jump back to BLM that Robin brought up. In both articles that I mentioned earlier, Lexus Figueroa had a quote, and I'm going to read it. It's a slap in the face, Lexus Figueroa said Tuesday. It's a way to incite us. It's a political move. Now, obviously, if you know me, I vehemently disagree with his comment, but he and many others in the BLM movement obviously believe that. What, if anything, will you advise the new chief or direct him to establish a dialogue and or a relationship with those members of the BLM movement who've been, beyond vocal?
Well, you raise a couple of very, very good questions there, Dan. And Chief Crooks tried on multiple occasions, and I'm sure, Robin, you can confirm this.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple occasions to invite Lex and BLM to conversations. They never wanted to take him up on the offer. The previous city council appropriated $30,000 for private mediation services. They refused to participate.
Yeah, they don't want to talk.
And to me, Dan, I think one of the most important things that people have to recognize is BLM to this day insists that Tyler McIntosh and others at the scene murdered Darrell Mount. They executed Darrell Mount. They repeat this over and over again. One of the cornerstones of my campaign was I promised a report on the Darrell Mount case. And I delivered on that promise in the second month in office. I issued a 37-page report based on sworn testimony available in the public domain from the civil lawsuit, as well as the police reports that were filed publicly and filed with the civil lawsuit. and I went through 37 pages of analysis. There are 4 civilian eyewitnesses, not even counting the police officers, 4 civilians with no connection to law enforcement whatsoever, who saw Darrell Mount on the ground in the alley. One of the 4 actually saw him jump from the scaffolding to the fire escape and then lost his grip on the railing and fell to the alley. So 4 civilians who've testified under oath that we were there, and he was face down, unconscious on the ground before any police officers arrived. And so to me, the issue is it's closed. And the claim that he was murdered is a lie. And the mere fact that the lie gets repeated over and over again is not going to give it any traction. I'm disappointed that the civil lawsuit is still pending. I mean,
yeah, why, Jim? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Why? It seems crazy to me that it's taken so. It's just been years and years and years.
Well, some of it is the problem of the pandemic. The pandemic
Right.
kind of kicked 2 years out of our history.
Right.
And another thing that occurred was the city had filed a motion for summary judgment back in December of 2019.
Right.
And in the ordinary course, that would have moved the ball forward. But right around that time, there was the repeal of Civil Rights Law 50A. You remember this, I'm sure, where the disciplinary records of police officers were no longer shielded. And that allowed the plaintiff's attorney to make a successful motion to reopen the discovery phase of the litigation. And there were some questions that the medical examiner refused to answer during his deposition that the judge said should have been answered. So the judge reopened discovery for those 2 different reasons, and that extended the lawsuit into the pandemic. And then things, of course, went the way they went. Right now, the city has renewed its motion for summary judgment. I haven't looked recently. I know that the deadline for the filing of plaintiff's opposition papers was originally late April, and I believe that may have been extended either on consent or by court order. I haven't looked recently. I think that plaintiff should, if they haven't already, they're about to be filing their opposition papers. And the summary judgment motion is going to be critical in the determination of whether the case goes to trial or just gets dismissed. So, but it's been 9 years since that lawsuit was filed.
Yeah, which is just bad for all parties. You know, it's bad for everybody. But may I just also make one statement in regards to Dan's question about encouraging the chief to establish a dialogue with BLM. Els Figueroa has made it abundantly clear that his end goal is to abolish the police entirely. That's his end goal, is to have no police. And so between calling our police department murderers repeatedly, between establishing his goal of abolishing the police department entirely, I don't see any reason why our police department should be in communication with him at all. I mean, I just don't. And I think that if the Commissioner of Public Safety wants to have a dialogue with Els, go right ahead. But I don't see any reason why the police department should feel compelled to try to establish a dialogue with someone who doesn't believe in their existence entirely. I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
No, you know, it's an excellent point, Robin. One of the 50 points that the Police Reform Task Force had recommended involves increasing contact with the community. And the reality is our police department has enormous areas of outreach with all segments of the community. And I don't hear anybody other than BLM complaining about the quality of our police force, the approachability of our officers. You know, when you talk to the parents of kids in our public schools and they talk about the SROs, everybody just gushes. We had a situation only a week or two ago where the newly appointed SRO for the elementary schools came to the assistance of a 7-year-old who was obviously physically injured. Yeah. And it turned out that his mother had beaten him with a plunger handle. And the SRO went with him to the hospital. He had to be transferred from Saratoga Hospital to Albany Med because Albany Med has a child trauma center. Our SRO followed the child to Albany Med, and I'm told that the child asked the SRO to stay at his bedside, and the officer did. I mean, his overtime request was immediately granted. He stayed with that kid until 10 o'clock at night, and saw the kid a couple of days later when the kid was out of the hospital and had been placed with foster care, and they had this great reunion. It's a wonderful area for relationships to get built, and for the police to do the job of protecting and serving that they do. And I don't hear anything but praise from all the other sectors of the community, except for BLM. And they just, they scream and they holler and they shut down meetings.
I just need to jump in here. And I don't disagree with too much of what you're saying. And if BLM simply will not sit down, I get it. But if there's an opportunity for somebody within the public safety chain in the city to have a cup of coffee with someone from BLM, they're a force in this city. And lately they've been a disruptive force. I don't think ignoring them is going to make them go away. If they ignore us, or if they ignore, the police side of things, I'm talking like a police officer.
I totally agree. But you have to look at.
Then so be it. But I still think if there's an opportunity there to have dialogue.
But
it's been 3 years of trying to have dialogue through every which way. And if you look at 3 years and 2 different city councils, and no one from BLM is willing to sit down with anyone from the police department or anyone in the public safety department and have a cup of coffee. I mean, I offered, anywhere, anytime, I'm willing to talk. Anywhere, anytime. Same with our police department. And it was turned down every single time. And I'm hearing the same thing from Commissioner Montagnino. And then at some point, is it this side that's the problem, or is it the other side that is professing to want to talk but isn't sincere in what they're saying?
If that's the case, I get it. And by dialogue, I don't mean capitulate. They're flat out wrong on a lot of the things. And Commissioner, kudos to you for saying this. The quote was, repeating a lie is not going to make it true. Good for you for saying that. That was emphatic. I'm 1,000% with you on that. And if they won't sit down, I get it. I just don't know. You two are, you were inside, Robin, Commissioner. Now you're inside. You've got a better viewpoint than I do.
They're only interested in.
I'm not saying capitulate. They're flat out wrong.
In doing it performatively. They're only interested in having doing something performatively at a city council meeting, screaming back and forth, having me come out in the middle of a protest and screaming at me with a bullhorn. There was never any interest in actually sitting down at a room at a table and having a conversation that would be productive, even when there was a mediator involved. There was every excuse under the sun, but truly, I tried so many times, it was embarrassing. Honestly, it was embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, for me, there was something of an epiphany when the Civilian Review Board had their inaugural meeting. There was one BLM supporter who sat in the back of the room, nobody else. And exactly. I was amazed because for years, they were pounding the table saying, we want a CRB.
Yep.
And that was one of the 50 points that, Robin, full well, the previous city council adopted in principle only.
Well,
and they were infuriated that it was only in principle. And I ran on a promise to get the CRB up and running. And I wrote the ordinance that created the CRB. It passed unanimously in the city council in May of 2022. It took a long time for the council to appoint the members of the CRB. But my point is, if they really wanted the CRB, I would have thought they'd be there in force, chanting and singing and applauding that we finally got what we wanted. And they weren't there.
Jim,
what that said to me was, we just want whatever you happen to be telling us we can't have today.
It happened over and over again, Jim. when Commissioner Golub was appointed and then elected to the city council, and they've been looking for representation for people of color on our city council, there was no one to be had in the audience when he was being appointed. When he was first there was not a soul from BLM there supporting that appointment, supporting his election. There was nobody there. And I thought,
again, go back to February 7th. They were criticizing Commissioner Golub, and he was sitting there saying, I was co-chair of the police reform task force. I wrote the 50 points. Why are you heaping this on me?
I know he and I wrote a version of a civilian review board that they completely, track. I mean, it just, again, I couldn't agree more. It's when push comes to shove, when the real work is getting done, when the real work is getting accomplished, there's no one to be found. And you're just like mystified. But when they're going to have a protest because, the murder of Tyree Nichols, and you're not there for that, they're furious. But that's not actually affecting change in our community. That's not affecting the goals that they profess to want to achieve in our community. And so, again, it's just all feels so performative, and none of it feels like they want to do legitimate work to achieve policy change or legislative goals. And so, yeah, it all rings totally hollow to me. And I share your sentiments.
Okay.
Good. I think
we've taken a lot of your time,
yeah.
Commissioner. I know.
I'm sorry?
I know we've taken a lot of your time, Commissioner.
I thank you for it, and I'm a little disappointed, I guess, that we seem to be in agreement on so much.
I'm sure we can come up with something to fight if you want to fight. No, how is morale in the police department going into the summer? Because I know you're about to hit your very busy season.
Well, I one of the nice things is, as I mentioned, that Tyler McIntosh is adored by the people that he works with, and they're really, really pleased at this choice. So morale is really high. We've got some really good people who are new to the force, who are doing exceptionally well, recently got off of their field training and so on. There is that kind of butterflies in the stomach that people have with the summertime approaching, because they don't know, or are we going to see some problems that we did a couple of years back? But to answer the question directly, I mean, morale is through the roof. It's superb. We've got a fantastic department.
We do.
And in systems that allow outsiders to become chief, that is often a morale killer. Sometimes it's needed for certain departments, but it is almost invariably a morale killer when you bring someone that has no connections to the department, especially from 6 states away. That could destroy morale.
Good point, Dan.
Well, yeah, I often feel that's usually done when the department's really gone left, or just gone awry, and so a chief needs to be brought in to kind of get everybody back on track, because the department's, that's in my experience, that's usually when outside police chiefs are brought in. But I will be right down, I live right on Lower Caroline Street, so I've got my finger on the pulse in terms of when things get out of control on Caroline. So I'll be my eyes and ears will be open this summer, and hopefully things will stay quiet. But so far so good, I will say. Things have been, this last weekend, Memorial Day, things were getting a little noisy, and I was feeling that kind of craziness in the air. But everything was tamped down, and the police presence was great, and the bars seem to be communicating really, really well, which is great. I think the bars, something's happened in the last year where the bars really seem to be just really a lot more buttoned up, I think.
Lieutenant McIntosh has been point person on a lot of that with the downtown committee. He's been participating in that, where all owners are getting together and communicating.
Quick question, was there, and forgive me, because I'm not sure if this ever went to a discussion and vote, or if it was just a discussion. What ended up happening with the agenda item that you brought with the guns and the being drunk or high and carrying a gun, and that agenda item?
That was on for discussion only at the last meeting. Okay. It's on for discussion and vote, as well as public hearing for the June 6th meeting.
Do you expect that to pass?
I expect it to. There may be some relatively minor changes to it, in this sense. The research I've done, the question that Tony Izzo brought up at the last council meeting, that he didn't know the answer to, but he brought up the question of state preemption of gun control. And one of the things I may change some of the language, couple of areas. A former member of law enforcement called me with a couple of very good suggestions. One of which was to add the word vessel to the definition of public place, because, as you know, we have the shoreline of part of the lake, which is part of our jurisdiction. But the other thing also was, when someone nowadays is arrested for a crime, there's a notification made by DCJS to the licensing authority if that person has a pistol license.
Oh.
So the suggestion is that the way the proposed ordinance is drafted, it's after conviction that there's a notification made. The suggestion is that it should be done at the time of the citation for the violation. But the substantive change that I'm thinking about is just changing the order of some of the language to make it clear that we're not restricting the possession of a firearm. What we're restricting is being in a public place in an impaired or an intoxicated condition if you are in possession of a firearm. So, for example, New York City has a provision in its administrative code that doesn't prohibit public drunkenness, but it prohibits public drunkenness under circumstances where the individual is a danger. So this would be a classic example of that, right? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with staggering down Caroline Street at 2 a.m. on Friday.
Right.
But if you're staggering down Caroline Street with a loaded revolver on your hip, now you're a risk.
It's a different story.
Right.
Yeah.
So I may tweak the language a little bit so that it's clear that the focus is not on regulating gun possession, but on regulating the circumstances under which a person can be impaired or intoxicated publicly.
Gotcha.
But that's coming, it'll be up for vote on the 6th.
I mean, it seems to me, I don't have a super strong opinion about it one way or the other, but it seems to me dissuading people from carrying a loaded handgun if they're drunk or high I don't really see any negatives there, you know?
The whole thing was that November 20th shootout.
Right.
The parties involved, the two people who were armed, had the presence of mind in one case to call an Uber, and I think in the other case they had a designated driver. So when you think about it, they had the forethought to say, well, I'm going to be going out drinking, so I'm going to make sure I'm not driving. But at the same time, they didn't give a second thought to the fact that I'm carrying a loaded firearm with me, and my judgment's going to be impaired.
Yeah, I can't follow that logic at all, man.
Yeah.
You know?
And to your earlier point, when someone that's a teacher or involved in public education is arrested, not convicted, but arrested, the state education department gets an automatic notification. So why couldn't we do that with pistol permits?
Yeah, for real.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Really good point.
So the system's already in place. It just has to be copied for the pistol permit registry.
Well, as someone who lives, a stone's throw away from all this action with all my little kids, I appreciate everything you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for being as great as great as you were. This was a very pleasant experience.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Commissioner. We appreciate it.
Okay. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Hello, Dan.
Most of our guests are repeat guests. He was a first timer.
I know. So now I think the only person we haven't had on now is Commissioner Golub. We got to get his cute self on the Cup podcast. I'm going to have to do a little shaming and tell him he's the odd man out here. He hasn't come on.
Yeah.
So now let's see. I think we have a comment too.
He's my neighbor. I'll harass him.
Let's see. We have one comment here from James. Oh, long comment about Saratoga BLM. Are they actually an official local registered chapter of BLM or just a group calling themselves by the BLM name? Apparently, they can call themselves a nonprofit, but I've looked at all. So I do not think they're an official local registered chapter. I think they just call themselves Saratoga BLM. I actually think that's how most of the BLM chapters are set up. I think very few are actually like registered and official. And they're not registered 501c3. That's my understanding, at least. So,
at least locally, right? There probably are some around the country that might be, but not.
Yes, some
not
around the country might be, but Saratoga BLM is not a 501c3. If they were a 501c3, they would have to publish their donations and how they're distributed and so on and so forth. And that information is not. We don't have that information. So.
Yeah, I get the feeling there's no organization. It's more a movement than an organization. It is an organization, but not an officially registered one or sanctioned or whatever.
And I think that's purposeful. There's no like officially elected leaders. I think that's purposeful. But I know we were supposed to have Abby on. What time is it? But I have not seen her. So I think
she did text us.
She did?
Yes, I don't know that she got the link.
Oh. Well,
I know you sent it because I saw it, but maybe she didn't get it.
Well, it's 1:00, so perhaps we can have her on next week.
Okay.
Because I think we just hit an hour. So should we wrap up with some cheers and jeers, Dan? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You got the fancy banner for us?
I do have. Hold on, give me a second. I do. I think I should have it. Where are we? My one big animation. There it is. There it is. All right. What do you have for us, sir?
Okay. Well, it's a cheer and a jeer, right? All wrapped in one. The scary limo crash, such a horrific incident, to relive it through the trial. That's of course the jeer part. They have a Saratoga connection with Mavis on South Broadway, doing apparently a fraudulent inspection and fraudulent billing for work they never did, which was part of this case. Beyond a jeer, right? It just makes me want to puke. Especially to have a Saratoga connection with and it's still there it's Broadway. That part of the story is not over for Mavis, right? There could be a Saratoga County, the DA's office could look for criminal action on that as well beyond that. But so to keep going, at least a bit of a Naman Hussein, I'm probably saying his name wrong, minutes before we went on today, was just sentenced to the maximum of 5 to 15 years in prison. Not nearly enough for causing that many deaths, but it's what the law allowed at this time. It's the maximum based on what he was convicted for. So I can't even use the word cheer. How could you use? But especially because it's so underwhelming, it's a measure of justice. Thank God the jury came back with a guilty verdict or guilty verdicts for all the victims. But it's something that makes your stomach sick. These poor families, mostly out of Amsterdam. So I won't classify anything there as a cheer or jeer, just kind of a news update with a sad Saratoga connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad the maximum was imposed, though. That's yes. Yeah. The best circumstance you could ask for in the worst set of circumstances, I suppose.
Yeah, good, well stated. Yes.
Yeah. My cheer and jeer just completely went out of my brain. I guess I will say a cheer that we had on Commissioner Montagnino, who, let's be honest, I have torn to shreds on this podcast.
Me too.
Time and time and time again. So, I just will say that the reason we created the Saratoga Podcast was so we could have civil dialogue and we could have agreements and disagreements, but create a space to do that with respect. And so I'm glad we were able to have him on today and have some productive conversation. I think that's a really good thing. And I think it's something that we want to encourage and keep doing in the future. So I'm cheering us today, Dan. I'm cheering us today.
And the commissioner, I believe, right?
Yeah, and the commissioner, of course. Yes, of course. And the commissioner for coming on and taking a chance to come on and join us today, not knowing what the outcome was going to be. Although who knows, if Adam had been here, it could have gone a totally different direction. You don't know. You don't know. Jeers. Oh, my jeer. I do have some jeers. I have got a jeer Saratoga County and also Dan McCoy in Albany, because their response to the migrants there were 2 busloads of migrants who came up from New York City. New York City sent them up. The reaction from Dan McCoy has just been, in my opinion, total bullshit. It's been really reprehensible to read and hear, in my opinion. They're suing New York City over this. They said they were totally ambushed by it. It's just the reaction. They declared a state of emergency, just all this, in my opinion, all this nonsense, political bullshit, virtue signaling, none of which has been truthful or honest. And, the real deal is New York City is picking up the tab for the food, the shelter, the services necessary to house and help these folks. These are people that are fleeing their home countries because they could not survive or exist there. These are not people who are coming here to be opportunistic. These are not coming here. These are not people who are coming here to replace you, your jobs, take opportunities from you. They are people who are coming here so they can exist and live because they could not exist and live in their home countries. And, I can't imagine that their dream was to come to Albany or Colony. And they're not going to be here permanently. They are just trying to survive and hopefully end up somewhere where they can live and raise a family in a way that is safe and, doable. And they can put food on the table and a roof over their head. So, these are human beings that, in my opinion, we should be greeting with some grace and some humanity, and not with lawsuits and fucking political nastiness. So that would be my jeer for the day. Dan
wow.
McQuarrie.
Powerfully stated. Powerfully stated.
I know. And I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for that because
that's fine. We've all set our pieces on here, and some people agree with us and some people disagree with us. Exactly. And mostly everybody's been cordial. Even the ones that disagree, I've had some harsh words, but still some level of respect from what I've seen anyway.
You know where it gets the harshest when I express some of these opinions on Twitter, that's where people can be gnarly. Twitter's a nasty place to live, but you know what? It's Twitter.
But I'm saying this podcast, when people disagree with us, it's been largely civil.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you know what? I would like to think that's because we're civil in our disagreements. And so, you set the tone, much like the city council. They're not civil in how they fight. And so people come to public comment and they're not civil in how they address the city council.
Good. Well, good point. Good analogy. Good comparison.
Thank you. All right, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Look at that. We kept it under an hour.
I know. Oh, yeah. Less under the hour. See you here. Same time, same place next week.
City council meeting, and it'll probably be a full one because Commissioner Montagnino mentioned that bill will maybe go through a hearing, have some amendments perhaps, and so there's going to be, let's face it, it's Saratoga, folks. There's no city council meeting that isn't full anymore. It's
going to be a big one too, especially because I know Saratoga BLM is planning to come and speak out against the McIntosh's appointment. So it'll be a big one. We'll be there. We'll be watching. We'll be listening, and we will be recapping it for you next Wednesday at noon. And you could find this podcast, if you haven't watched it live today, it's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Twitter, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio. It's all over the place. So if you haven't watched it here, subscribe to any of those, watch it where you find podcasts, and we will see you next week.
Cool.
Thank you. Bye, Dan.
Bye-bye.